we had a conversation, Jim and I, just about this idea of kind of going through the process of what it takes to like put some paint on something. So I had this idea, like, what if I took a piece that was going from an original paint, and then we go through the whole process on the same piece all the way up to finished with pinstripes and decals and stuff like that. So this is kind of what I came up with. I just want to give my disclaimer about this stuff. I just learned this stuff from doing it. I'm not employed by a body shop. I don't do anything like that. I wouldn't be considered to be an expert. The thing I'd like to say about the word expert is if you break the word down, X is an unknown. Spurt is liquid drip under pressure. So if you put them together, it is an unknown drip under pressure, right? So my take on an expert is you know, no one likes know-it-all. I certainly don't. So I'm not trying to say I'm a know-it-all. I'm not an expert about this stuff. There's 1,000 ways to skin a cat. There's always going to be someone who has done it different, heard about something being done differently. They use different products than I use. You know, I just plink away at this stuff in my garage. So that being said, I'm just going to go through kind of the process of this project. So and I'm just going to kind of point this from the lens of what this is. This is a 1930s Harley VL fender. And at the moment I'm working on a 28 JD, which needs these same sort of colors. So I thought it would be a good place to get my feet wet on trying to figure out the color scheme and how to, you know, apply the paint to look like late 20s Harley stuff. So all the stuff I'm saying is not just Harley stuff. This is like anything, right? This is stuff for painting all kinds of motorcycles and non-motorcycle stuff as well. Okay, so I don't want to just be someone who talks about a brand specific thing. This is for, you know, anyone who wants to paint anything. Okay. So first off, we'll start with this idea of what this was. This was a fender that needs to have a paint matched on it. So the colors that we are seeing right here, this is an olive and a red. This would be a factory sort of color scheme that Harley would have come up with. And a lot of people's ideas, how do we get paint matched, right? Like I have a color that I really want to be exactly the right color, or I have a 1971 Triumph and I need to get that exact color that Triumph had in 1971. Well, it's a tough thing because most of the time you just either have to have an original part with that color on it, or you have to have somebody who's willing to provide some sort of a paint sample or a paint code for a product that you can actually have mixed. And they've done all the work to get it matched in the first place. Okay, so it's not just so easy as you take your 1928 Harley fender down to the paint shop and be like, I need 1928 Harley paint. They're gonna be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, so let's talk about how this one got matched. There was a guy in Fort Collins, Colorado, whose father owned a 1927 Harley, brand new. And it came with a can of touch-up paint for the Harley Davidson. It was a can of olive paint. He opened it up and it was still pliable. It was still actually good. So he was able to like add some turpentine to it because it was a pine-based paint at that time period. He was able to mix it up and get a sample out. Then he was able to take it to a paint shop. They were able to take a photo with it. They have like paint shops will have a matching program with a camera, so they can kind of analyze the color and then translate the values and the colors from that into a product line that they currently mix. So that's what he did. He had a PPG paint shop, mixed this color, and then he did a spray out, and it is astounding how close it is to that can of paint. So, if you ever wanted to know pretty much what a 1928 Harley would have looked like, this is it. That is the color. And the red, that was matched off an original paint Harley. And it just so happens that the closest matches. This is 1980 VW. So, at any rate, this is so that's one of the aspects to getting this paint stuff done. It's like, do we want to match something? If you do, then we need to have something to match it off of. Okay? All right. The paint's made up. Now we want to paint this thing. What do we do? Well, first off, we've got original paint, right? This thing was bought at a swap meet years ago. It was meant for a chopper. Never made it onto the chopper, so I decided to do this with it. Okay? So we got original paint. The next thing we need to do is get rid of the paint. Right? We need to get to a place where there is no rust, there's no paint. We want straight, bright metal. Okay? So there's all kinds of different ways to do it. I like to do, try to get rid of as much as I can mechanically. So a wire brush, scrapers, things like that. And then you can see it has a sandblasting texture. So I got rid of as much as I could, and then I sandblasted. And it just so happens this was such a badly painted fender that when I put tape on this, it ripped about half the paint off. So that's a very unconventional way to remove paint, but masking tape took a lot of paint off of this fender. Okay, so the next step is bare metal. This is when I do all of the repair work. So this is dent removal time period. This is welding time period. This is when you fix rips, tears, replace sections that may need to be replaced, if you need to make patch panels, plug holes. So there's a dent left in this piece here, and then there are some plugs here that I left, kind of poorly done plugs here. So that's kind of what you work for, okay? So the next step we get to, and then we're going to get into some of the products that it takes. Part of this talk is also going to be, Jim and I talked about this, was it's expensive to get paint work done. People charge exorbitant fees, and is it because they're gouging you? Probably not. It's because it's 2023, and a gallon of gas is $4, right? So this stuff is not cheap, right? So the idea behind this talk is, why does it cost so much? What kind of stuff does it take, and how much time does it take? Okay? I will say most people that charge to do this stuff, they're not making great hourly. They're just not making great hourly. It's just not what happens. Okay, so next stage we get after we remove paint. And by the way, this is also a conversation. If you have questions, concerns, you've heard about different ways to do it, or you want to know something specific while I'm going through this, just jump in and say it, right? I want this to be a back and forth thing. It's just not me saying information. I want people to jump in if you want, okay? All right, so the next step is just getting some primer on it, right? So I like to use an epoxy primer. Some people don't like epoxies, other people do. That's what I like to use. And so how you mix this stuff is you follow the instructions. I was talking to somebody earlier today about this, like, how do you mix paint? Well, it's not like it's some sort of just mix it together and see what happens. There are tech sheets that come with all of this stuff. The tech sheets say it's 2 parts to 1 part, and it's all by volume. So you use mixing cups that have volumetric measurements on the side, and you just follow those. It's really designed so there's not a lot of thought when it comes to mixing this stuff. It's pretty cut and dried. Yeah?
From experience where I used to work, guys were pretty careless about how they did that. And that stuff, is really technical. I mean, you have to do it exactly like they say. You put half of it in there, it's not going to work right. Then you're going to say, well, the paint's no good. No, it's really good you didn't mix it right, right?
Yeah, so as a good example, this epoxy primer has a 15-minute induction period, which means you put the two parts of paint, the one part of catalyst, and you mix it up. That means that you need to wait 15 minutes before you spray it. What's happening is that the catalyst is starting to create that, chemical reaction that is going to set the resin. And yeah.
Doesn't the primer determine what kind of paint you're going to use later on? Lacquer versus oil paste versus blah blah blah?
That is a great question, and I'm not entirely sure of that answer. I do know that all the stuff I do is not lacquer based. It is not waterborne paint. Everything I do is acrylic urethane based, so it does all match. That would be a question for a paint salesman. And I do know that I bet you within the next 10 or 15 years, a lot of the products you see up here will probably start to fall by the wayside. I have a feeling that the waterborne technology is going to start to become quite a bit more commonplace. It's very expensive to shoot waterborne stuff right now because the technology is very new. All the stuff I'm showing here is very high quality materials, but they have not put any technology or any new research into this technology for probably the past 25 years. So really, you know, they stopped making this stuff get better and better, and now they're putting their efforts into waterborne stuff. So I don't know that. That is to answer your question more directly. I would most definitely consult tech sheets if you decide you're going to go with a waterborne or another type of paint. So, is that a decent enough answer? Okay. All right. So yeah, you just follow the tech sheets, right? So now I've got this primer on. I've sprayed it on. The next section I'm going to do is I'm going to work with some filler. Right, and I'll just throw some numbers with how much the stuff costs too. I'm not trying to like scare anybody away. I just want to like I just want to kind of put a number on some of this stuff. You're like, well, it's just some paintwork on a fender. Why was it $600? Because it's $180 for a gallon of this primer. Yes.
But you don't have to use the gallon on the one fender.
You don't. You don't. However, if I am going to paint one fender, that's all I'm ever going to do. Am I going to go out and buy all of this stuff to paint one fender?
I hope not.
Yeah, and so that's the thing. If you decide you just want one thing painted, probably a better idea to just have somebody paint it for you. If you want to like make it a thing and like go out and paint a whole bunch of things, maybe investing in this stuff is good. Right? So it's kind of like a numbers game. Or am I going to like break the bank on just buying product? Right? Yeah.
The other factor is how often do you do it? Because your epoxy goes bad after a decade or two.
Very good point. There are some of these products that they have a very short shelf life. They could be this hardener for the clear. It's like a 3 or 4 month shelf life, even less than that. I think the tech sheets say like a month. So it's right. The great point. If you're not gonna, there's no reason to buy all this stuff and let it all go bad, right? Okay. So we shot the primer. Now we're gonna go with filler. I use a 3M filler that is referred to as a glaze. So it's a pretty thin filler. It doesn't have a lot of sag resistance. So if I'm doing on vertical panels, it'll like to kind of run out. It's more designed for doing like smaller items and also like rust pits and things like that. If I'm trying to fill a big, huge section, like a big dent, this is not your filler. They make fillers for that, okay? By the way, filler's about $50 a thing, right? So we're starting to add it up. Okay, Also, I can use this. Primer as a sealer, which is what the next section is. So after I've applied my filler, I've sanded my filler, now I do another coat of primer, and I can thin this primer down to where it would be considered a sealer at this point. And you can do that by just adding some acetone to that epoxy. And this, again, you know, between 15 and 35, depending on the grade of acetone you're getting to, right? Okay.
Hey, Tom?
Yes.
So the filler, like you've got bare metal, and then, so it's just not a real good surface? Is that the idea? Like even after the primer?
Okay, so great example. It's tough to see, and I can pass this fender around if people want to like look at all this stuff. I'll just pass it around, people can look at it. You know, the idea is that like if I'm going to do a bunch of metal work to this, I could probably spend weeks getting this thing perfectly smooth, so I don't have to use fillers on it. However, it's a little bit more time effective if I get it really close. And let's say there's some little dings or little, you know, rust marks or something. You've got to use some sort of a plastic filler to fill that up. That's kind of the idea. Okay? All right. And you know, in the old days, this would have been lead. This would have been lead-tin combination. It would have been floated on and then filed off. Right? I do know how to do that stuff, but that's not part of this conversation. Okay. All right. So now that this was on, I did a sealer coat, and then I like to do a wet sand of my primer at this point. Wet sand 400 to 600 grit paper. That's also in the tech sheets as well. People are like, well, I like to use this grit or I like to use that grit. I follow what the tech sheet says. If PPG says you should go to 400 wet, it means that they've designed their paint to adhere to a 400 wet sanded surface. So, you know, I'm not a chemist. I didn't design the paint. I'm going to trust the people that did. That's kind of my take on this. Okay? So we do a wet sand. We get it as flat as we possibly can. The next thing we get to is we're gonna work on getting some base coat on here. Okay. I just have to mention that there are some cleanup that has to happen between a lot of these coats. So I've touched this with my hands, and you know, a lot of times I might use some latex gloves so I'm not getting the natural oils on my hands on everything. But it's always a good idea to use some sort of a degreaser between all of these stages before you apply a paint. And these degreasers come in different ways, or in different forms. I use something called the wax and grease remover. This is actually a pretty cheap gallon. It's like $15 or $20 for this stuff. And it's usually best applied in an aerosol manner. So I use a little aerosol thing. So I load it in the top, and then I can squirt this on. And then when you don't do this sort of thing. It's just like one wipe and it's done. You don't want to like grind your contaminants into the surface. You do this and you're done. You turn it over to a clean side of the rag, you do it again. So we don't want to take our contaminants and just rub it in. Okay? This gets rid of wax and grease. So this is great for other stuff, which is going to happen up here. The next thing is sometimes natural oils do not get attacked very well by these wax and grease removers, which is my next thing, which is isopropyl alcohol. This does good with natural oils, right? So I will do a wax and grease remover to get rid of oils and greases and waxes. Then I'll use this to go after natural stuff, like maybe coming off my hands. Now I'm ready for a spray, except we need a tack cloth. And tack cloths don't come with instructions, but there are some do's and don'ts with these things. The idea is that you just don't open this thing up as it is and just start wiping. You open this thing up all the way. It's gross feeling. It's like weird little, you know, open it all the way up, and then you crumple it. So it's light, fluffy, crumpled stuff. And then you do that whole thing. And the same thing with that. You don't do this grinding motion. It's just straight lines. Okay? I've removed my debris that may be on the surface, like lint, dust, whatever, beard hair, pet hair. I have a black dog, so you know, there's been times when I get black dog hair in the paint job and it really sucks. So, you know, tack cloths will go a long way with that. And you know, this is like the sort of thing that this is a $2 item. And this will go a long way on making a nice paint job. Seriously, just the idea of getting rid of debris on a surface. It's like, that's a pro tip. I mean, it's funny that it's a $2 item, right? Okay, so now it's time to make the base coat go down. First base coat is my olive. All right? Here's the olive. These mix 1-to-1 via the tech sheet, right? Look at the tech sheet. 1 part of this to 1 part reducer. Okay? I make sure that my reducer matches this. So I was talking to somebody earlier about this. You just have to make sure that you buy products that match each other. You know, I don't have 15 different brands. I'm not using a different brand of reducer from the paint, those sorts of things. There are people who make those changes and don't have problems. I've made those changes and not had problems. I've made those changes and had huge problems. So I just have gotten under the, I'm working under the impression that it's going to be a problem. So I always make it match. The other thing is that you can also change your reducer based on the temperature that you're spraying in. They make reducers that dry paint really quickly. They make ones that prolong, right? So I painted, when I painted my Indian frame, there's a lot of nooks and crannies, and I didn't want to have to do a lot of post-paint work. So I put a really slow reducer in it, which means the paint stays wet a really long time, which means I can get around and make the whole thing shiny. The repercussion to that is you can get runs really badly. So you just have to be careful with that, okay? But usually what these different temperatures of a reducer are for is for the temperature in which you're spraying, right? If it's the middle of winter, you can buy super cold reducers. And the reducers are all based on these numbers. 70 is about 70 degrees. They make an 885, which is that 85 and up. They make an 860, which is like, you know, which would be shooting in February sort of reducer, okay? So you can buy those reducers at those different temperatures. And you know, as far as this goes, I have this stuff on here per ounce. This base is $5 an ounce. This reducer is about $1 an ounce, right? So it's highly possible that I've got $20 or $30 worth of base coat just in olive right there, okay? So now the next thing I'll go to, I'm going to do multiple coats of base, right? So I'm going to put tape on the base coat, and I found that a lot of times I end up having problems with tape marks and scratch marks and stuff with regular base coat. So then I do what's called an intercoat clear, which is basically, this is basically the base coat without pigment. Okay, so I'll do a quick intercoat clear over the base, and it seems to be more resistant to problems like finger marks and scratches, things like that, when I'm doing some multiple colors. This also has another great thing, which I'll talk about here in a second. Okay, so intercoat clear. Now we apply our tape. Okay, how I did these tape lines is that I got tape that was that thick, and I just ran it down here, and then I took some striping tape, and I put down each side of those lines. Let's talk about tape really quick. This isn't run-of-the-mill Home Depot tape. This is 3M, of course, you know, 3M, big brand name, whatever, but it's great tape. It doesn't stick to products. It doesn't leave residue like other products do. It can stay on paint for a longer time and not create tape marks, not create adhesion problems. So if you're gonna get into this, just spring for the nice tape. They make different tapes for different things as well. This is kind of your run-of-the-mill tape. They make a tape that is designed to be on for a longer period of time. They become more expensive. You know, I mean, this could be a $14, $15 roll of tape. Yeah.
They sell that at the paint supply store.
Yeah, they do. And so, you know, that's just it. We're not going to be able to buy this stuff at Home Depot. We're not getting this at Walmart or wherever, right? We are having to go to a specialty store to buy this stuff. However, there is a place for Home Depot paint, tape, and things like that, right? So now I've got this yellow tape on, right? And then this tape along the sides of the lines. Now I want to mask the rest of this off with paper. I am not going to blow a $15 roll of tape on taping paper on something. So that's when the $3 roll from Home Depot comes into play, right? It's always like, have my crappy roll for this, have my nice roll for this, okay? All right. So now that I've got my stripe masked off, I spray the red. Okay. Now I can pull my tape. 30, 40 minutes, pull the tape, now I'm ready to go. Here's the cool thing about this color blender. So the idea is, when you spray all of these paints, and I'll send this around, when you spray these paints, they create thickness. The more product I spray, the thicker and thicker it gets, right? So I have one base coat color here, I've got another base coat color here. There's a difference between that and thickness, right? So you can run your finger across here and feel the difference. Have you guys ever seen a paint job where there's 6 or 7 paint colors and it just feels flat? It's because that painter has filled enough of that surface up so you can't feel that. And one way to do that, a lot cheaper than the clear coat. So you spray multiple coats of this inner coat clear on, and what that does is it lessens the change between your first base coat and your second base coat. So I could have kept spraying and spraying and spraying until I didn't feel that difference. Okay? All right.
Tom, excuse my naivety.
Yeah.
But you want to get the red stripe and you want to get a black stripe. Did you paint everything green and then did the red? Or
Yes,
how did
yeah.
you
So
do
this is exactly how it goes, right? So everything was green, and then the red happened, right? So then all the stuff that is green in this section was masked off, right? So I just had, all that you could see was 2 green stripes. The rest was mask and tape and paper. Okay?
Okay.
So now that when I pull it off, the whole thing looked like that. Okay?
Okay.
So now I'm ready to go to clear coat. Here's a clear coat. Oh, and as far as cost on clear coats go, they range greatly. You can buy cheaper clear coats for that, like $200 a gallon. There are places that are selling it for $6.50 a gallon. I mean, it's very wide ranged. The stuff that I'm painting here is actually a little bit cheaper, but it's a very great producer, a great performing clear coat. It has very high solids. It doesn't shrink a lot. It doesn't move a lot. It seems to be a pretty decent clear coat. I'd say if you're going to do this, shoot for the middle. If you go with the cheapest stuff out there, you're going to run into, I used to shoot cheap stuff and I paid the price a lot for it. So I think middle of the road is a good place to start. Okay, so now now I'm ready to spray this. Now, all this can happen pretty quick, right? So from putting this base coat on until doing my clear, this is like 2 or 3 hours. It's not like you have to wait 48 hours between each of these sections, right? You actually do want to go pretty quick on this stuff, right? So this happens, unmask everything. Now I'm ready to spray clear. All right. So I mix the clear up. Again, do this between everything. Do this between everything. Between all your base coats, between all of your inner coat clears, between everything. every time you touch it, every time you put tape on it, this tape can pick up lint on the edge. Now I've put the tape down. Now I have little fringes of lint sticking out. If I use this tack cloth, it can get rid of some of that stuff. Okay? So it really is about the prep here. Okay? All right. Next thing we get to is spraying the clear. It's all about the tech sheet. People say stuff like, oh, I put 9 coats of clear on it. It's just the thickest. That's problematic. These clear coats call for 2 wet coats. That's it. Not 6 wet coats, not 4 super dry coats and 1 really thick wet coat, 2 wet coats. And what that means is the more product you get on here, the more shrinkage you get. So you can get all kinds of problems if you over apply as well. So I think it's really smart to not get crazy and think, I'm just gonna make this thing as shiny as I can in the spray booth and just throwing paint on it and just throwing paint on it. It's not smart to do that. Okay? All right, so now the paint is applied. 2 wet coats. And you know, these paint jobs are never finished in the booth. What that means is, let's say you've got 2 wet coats, but there's one area over here that's not quite as shiny as you want. Don't worry about it. We're gonna fix that later. And so what I'd like to do is pass this around and people can see what gun finish looks like. Gun finish means what did the finish look like when it came out of the gun, okay? This is not gun finish. This is a lot of effort and time after that, okay? So this is gun finish. There's some ripples in it. There's a run over here. I got a little too happy with the spray gun. I made a run happen here. Right here you can see some texture in it, right? It still looks okay, but if you look and compare it to this one up here, night and day, okay? People want to pass this around, take a look? Okay, so we put the clear on, and then when it comes to clears, also read the tech sheets on drying times. If it says 10 minutes between coats, follow it, 10 minutes between coats. Don't do an hour between coats. Don't do 3 minutes between coats. Do 10 minutes between coats, like it says, okay?
Does the temperature affect that? Or
Yeah, it does, and the tech sheet will say 10 minutes between coats at 70 degrees. And so if it's colder in the spray booth, you may need to wait a little bit longer. And one of the tricks I've come up with is usually there's going to be a section that I will have sprayed that's not going to be a finished paint job. Let's say it's like I was painting this section and there was some masking tape next to it. I might just feel how tacky that is. If it's tacky enough to where it's wet and it comes off, then I have to wait. If it gets to a point where I can kind of touch it and you don't really leave a lot of marks in it, now it's ready to go. So there is a little bit of that. Okay, so the paint is applied, or the clear is applied, and we let it cure out. The tech sheets say things like you can start to sand the clear coat if you need within like 8 hours. I do not do that. I let my clear coat sit for days. So this clear was applied. 6 days later, I started post-paint work on it. Okay? So what that does is it allows, and if you look at this section that I didn't sand yet, you can see little pock marks in it. You can see little divots, and that thing looked very, very clear before that 6-day period. So as time goes on, you will start to see blemishes happen. Sometimes you will see sanding scratches rear their ugly head, those sorts of things, right? And the longer that you wait, the more shrinkage the clear coat will incur. And now when you sand it flat, it stays flat. Doesn't create peaks and valleys. Okay? All right, so the next section is going to be color sanding. This is the section in which I take cured clear coat and I wet sand it with very fine sandpaper. This is a piece of 2000 grit paper. I start with 1500 grit paper, wet sand it, clean it off again with wax and grease remover, all that stuff, and then I go to 2000 grit paper. And so that's the section that you see where it goes from looking shiny to kind of looking matte. That's sanded clear coat. And you can see I left an area when you first start color sanding, you can see the texture of the clear coat. So when everyone gets a chance to look at that, you'll see the very first sandings. It's amazing how much texture that clear coat will show off. And so what I'm trying to do is get all of those little divots out. I'm trying to make it look completely smooth, like it does right up next to that line where the shiny part happens at the end. Okay? So I use 1500, then I do 2000 grit. Some people will go to 3000 after that. This is very much an opinion-based thing. I've seen some people say, I only do 1500 and then I just buff it flat. There are some people who go up to like 4,000 and 5,000 and 6,000 grit paper. It's really the same amount of work. It's just, do you want to do it with a buffer or do you want to do it with sandpaper? It's kind of up to you. Okay? All right. So now I've got it color sanded. And another trick with color sanding is I put some, you do it with water, and then a few drips of Dawn soap in the water. It really lubricates the surface, and what does soap do? It makes water more wet. That's what it does. It makes it coat, and it makes it flow over the surface better. Brand new clear coat with no water, or with soap with no water, it beads up. It has some surface tension. So if I can break the surface tension by putting some soap in it, it has a better job of keeping the surface wet when I'm sanding. The other thing I'll do too is I'll have a spray bottle with some soapy water in it. So sometimes I'll just use that as well too. So kind of like combination of a bucket with some soapy water and a spray thing, whatever. The other thing about all this sanding is that you always do it with the block. Never doing it with your fingers, right? Fingers love to do this. It accentuates peaks and valleys. Blocks make things flat. The nicest paint jobs is when something is flat, okay? How we get something shiny is it has to be completely flat, all right? So, I block sanded it up to 2000, now I'm ready for buffing.
Hey Tom?
Yes?
What about the spongy blocks?
Well, the spongy blocks are great for things like this fender, for instance. I'm not taking a hard, rigid block and like gonna block this fender. So I definitely use some foam blocks to block sand all this stuff. Yeah, and another trick about sanding, people love this thing. They love circle sanding. It's the worst thing. Circle sanding, if you see a sand scratch in a straight line, it just doesn't, your eye doesn't read it as a scratch as much as it does a bunch of little curly cues, right? So as you're doing these, as you're doing any of the sanding, whether it is filler, primer, base coat, clear coat, any sanding is all done in a straight line. Pick a direction and go that direction. So with this fender, for instance, all of my sanding was done with the arc of the fender. Never ever did I do a circle sanding on this. Okay? All right. So now it's time for buffing. This is also a very much an opinion-based item. I just use these 3M. I use a 3M system. It starts in a really aggressive cut compound. It goes to a middle compound, and it goes to a really fine compound. Right? They're color coded, and you can buy buffing pads for your buffer that are the same color as the compounds, so you don't mix them up. It's really nice. Okay, just to let you know, I just looked on Amazon this morning. The cheapest I could find this was about $170 for all of them together if you buy them as a set. If you buy them separately in a paint shop, you might be spending $70 a piece on this. Again, 3M, they love their name, they love their product, you pay for it. It is a good product, but it's expensive. Okay, so I start with the heavy grit, do the whole thing, go over it all. Now, my favorite Spray-Away glass cleaner, and my favorite microfiber towel. Spray this whole thing with your glass cleaner, clean it off with the microfiber towel. Now you're ready to go to step 2. Step 2, buff, glass cleaner, microfiber towel. Step 3, buff, same, right? All that stuff. Okay, so now I'm done. I've gotten to a point where it's very shiny, it's completely buffed. Now, I mean, maybe if it's just a 2-color paint job, you're finished at this point. Great. Well, let's say I need some pinstripes, like Harley Davidson had in 1928. You could do those tiny stripes in base coat. Some people elect for that. I like the stripe on top because that's more of like what Harley would have done in 1928. They would have applied a stripe by hand to the fender. So the next step is that we've buffed this thing. It is crazy shiny. And by the way, this last step has a little paraffin in it. It acts as a lubricant. It helps the buffing compound not scratch the surface up, and it does put a nice finish on it. Try putting paint on top of paraffin. It's going to act as a resist. So we're going back to wax and grease remover. Spray wax and grease remover over it. Use your microfiber towel. Now you're ready for a striper. You can stripe it yourself or you take it to a striper. You just need to let a striper know if you're taking it to them that what you did to it. Say, hey look, I buffed this. There might be some wax on there. There might be some grease on there. If a striper's worth their salt, they're gonna wax and grease remove it anyway. But I always wax and grease remove it before I take it to a striper just because I'm scared. That's all. I just want to make sure that it turns out. So those stripes, I'm not a hand striper. I taped those off with some paint, with some striping tape, and I used some one-shot enamel. This is sign painter's enamel. This is what pinstripers use to stripe with. There's a couple really great stripers locally. I know that some of you have used them before. I'm not endorsing any striper or anything else, but you know, it's a really hard thing to do. I'm not great at it, so I just taped those. But, you know, just to let you know, a little tiny thing like this is $10. You need a little turpentine to thin the paint out. That's all money, right? Okay.
So tell me, if you tape, then are you putting clear over the tape?
No, so what I'm doing is, I didn't explain that well. What I did is I took this thin tape and I taped on either side of where this black is. Okay? And then I striped between my little pieces of tape. And then when I was done, I pulled the tape, leaving just the black line. So I striped between the tape. Now, I think it looks okay, but I'm sure some of you who have had Bikes Juzz and AMCA, some of you who are like real discerning eye probably look at that and are like, that's a tape stripe. Some people don't mind a tape stripe, other people are like, that's not a hand stripe, I don't like that. It's really up to you. I don't know. I don't know. I personally, if I was gonna on my finished project, I'm not gonna stripe it myself. I'm gonna pay someone who is an exquisite striper to do it. I can't do that myself.
After you get it striped by somebody else, you come back clear coated again?
Okay, that's a great question. And it's something that I will talk about with this decal. So I'll grace that along with the decal. Okay, so I put the stripes on. The next thing I wanted to do is put a decal on this. Okay, so this is a water slide decal. This decal actually happens to be it's older than me. It's 50 years old. This is from the mid 70s, early 70s actually. I didn't think it was going to work, but I put it in the water and I slid it on, and I was just like so pleasantly surprised. I couldn't believe it. Sometimes these old water slides, they just go away. You put them in the water and pieces float away, and it's horrible. Anyway, this one worked great. This is a patent decal for late teens Harley. Anyway, so you put this on and then you squeegee the water out of it. Okay? Now, Harley originally, Indy and a lot of those 1920s companies, that they put, they wouldn't have used a decal, they would have used a transfer, which would have been similar to what a vinyl decal is now. It's on one side, they would have put it on, rubbed it, and then pulled the paper off, and that's what it would have looked like, right? It would have been a transfer. And then they would have used some sort of varnish to go over the top of it. So what I did is I used a sign painter's clear coat as a varnish to go over the top of this. So this thing is really sitting there on a wing and a prayer. You put a water slide decal on, you go 80 miles an hour, you might just watch it blow right off. Okay, so you can attach those. They make a decal applying compound, which is really good for like curved surfaces, but it kind of does a good job of adhering it. The other thing that I've come up with is I use a sign painter's clear coat to go on the top of this. So you're saying, well, why can't I just spray this clear coat on the top of my decal? It just crinkles it up. You'll spray it on and it'll look like you sprayed paint stripper on top of that decal. So what we need to do is we need to protect that decal from like blowing off or whatever. So this is the idea that I came up with. Sign painter's clear coat with a little sign painter's reducer. Again, $40 a quart. So dumb. You use about a thimbleful when you do these decals. But if anyone ever needs some, come to my place. I'll give you a little. I got a whole quart of it, right? And the same goes with the reducer, $15, right? So here I've got $55 wrapped up in just putting a little bit of clear coat on a decal, right?
How much overlap?
$5 for a thimbleful, right?
Yeah, right. So how much overlap was the question? With a brush, I just go in and I paint it so it's about a 16th, maybe 3/32 past the edge of the decal. That's kind of what I do. Okay, so now the question was, who asked that? Can I clear coat over this? Oh, Jim. Can I clear coat over these stripes? You have to let your striper know if you're going to clear coat over the stripes. Because if I spray my clear coat on just straight one shot, it'll also crinkle it up. However, one shot makes a hardener that can be mixed to the paint. And if you're going to clear coat over pinstripes, that's a really great way to do it. So you have your pinstriper add that hardener to the striping paint when they're applying the stripes. When it dries, it hardens. Now you can use acrylic urethane clear coats on the top of it. And that would also be a good technique for clear coating over a decal that would be crinkled up by a clear coat. So I do a quick brush coat of my sign painter's clear coat that's hardened with the same hardener product that you use for the regular striping paints. Now it creates a barrier between your decal and the acrylic urethane paint that gets sprayed on. Okay? If it's vinyl decals, if it's a vinyl safe, or if it's a clear coat safe vinyl decal, spray away. And most new decals that are vinyl are totally safe for clear coats. So, yeah.
But you want to do a test sample before you spray over it, right?
Very good point. Yeah. So I have a big piece of sheet metal that I primed, and every time I'm doing something weird, something that I'm not totally sure about, I will do a test on it. I'll rough that primer up. I'll spray a band of my base coat, and whatever I'm trying to do, I will emulate in a test before I'm gonna like slather it all over my rear fender that took me 4 days to make straight, right? There's nothing worse than doing all the work and then having to redo it, which I recently had to do. I did all this work for this car fender. I thought I followed the tech sheets like I have been preaching to you guys here today. Well, the primer didn't set. The primer stayed gummy for days. Had to go to a blaster and had to blast it all off and start over. I mean, this happens. We're all humans, and I'm just going to tell you, there's no such thing as a perfect paint job. If there's anything I can leave you with, it's that. It's not going to happen. Yeah.
If you got just a pinstripe that is tape, actually, do they clear coat over tape?
It really just depends what you want to do. I mean, if you want the tape to be a little bit more durable, then yeah, you can clear coat over those.
Would you do that by hand or what?
You mean you would apply a piece of tape as a
Yeah,
pinstripe?
say you've got a fender that's got tape on it, that has a pinstripe. It's just a pinstripe tape. Do they usually put clear coat over there, or is it just tape?
It just depends. I don't know. I mean, I've seen paint jobs where people have cleared over taped stripes, and I don't know. It's no different than applying a clear coat over a vinyl decal.
Yeah.
It's really the same thing. It's just that the decal's a long line as opposed to a design, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you could do that. I don't. It just depends what you're doing.
How about, so, talk to us a little bit about touch-ups. So let's say you got a little spot where there's no paint on a fender, and you got
Yeah.
and Bill's in Olathe did a match for you.
So this is tough. People always want to know about this. How do I do a touch-up? I got a rock chip. Well, that's what you got. You got a rock chip. Sorry. That's kind of like, that's what I'm sorry. We ride motorcycles, and I don't know, gravel hits your paint. It comes off, right? So what's the best way to touch it up? Well, get a touch-up paint made. And so what paint places can do is they can make a paint that is a little bit thicker than it would be for spraying, and it can be brushed on. That's as much as I can really tell you. Just get a good match, brush it on.
Bullet hole decal.
Yeah, put a Band-Aid on it. I don't know. I mean, it's tough. I know that there are painters who are exquisitely good at doing touch-ups. I am not one of those. I'm just not great at taking paint that's already there and spraying new color in it and making it look good. it's just not my skill set. There are people who are amazing at it. So, it's a really hard skill to learn, I believe. So, yeah, just part of I think the best thing to say is just go to a paint shop that knows how to match color, and then talk to them. And really, that's what most of this is about, is following people's instructions. That's all it is. I learned this by listening to people who knew what they were doing. That's the end of the story right there.
How about after the process is all over, long-term protection, waxes, carnauba, ceramic coating? What do you recommend? What do you use?
I'm not the person to talk to about that, really. I just keep it clean and dry. Just keep it clean and dry, and there's a whole host of wax products out there that I'm sure work great. I don't have a whole lot of opinion on that. I do know that when I've wanted to go back and touch things up, I've actually just used this. I've used the No. 3 buffing compound and gone back in by hand. So this sat in my shop for 2 or 3 weeks. I was grinding metal, and it was looking kind of gnarly, so I just took this morning and hand buffed over everything, and it seemed to brighten it up quite a bit.
Would you ever, if you were doing that with that final product, use a buffing wheel?
Yeah. This is
Or do it by hand?
All of the buffing I did on this was machine buffed.
So for a guy like me, who is not competent for any of this stuff,
I'm sure.
where
you
would I
could.
get? I can do a gallbladder, but I mean that's easy
Yeah.
in comparison to this. But a buffer wheel, like what would I be looking for if I wanted to take an older bike and make it look pretty?
Okay, so that's a good question. What do I use? I should have brought my buffer. I just use a little tiny handheld battery buffer.
Cotton wheel.
What's that?
Is cotton pad?
No, mine are foam pads. But some people use a wool. Some people, this is also an opinion-based thing. Mine are foam pads that match the compounds. This first compound pad is really stiff. It's pretty abrasive. And then as you go to the last compound, it becomes a lot softer and less abrasive. So, but yeah, you can use one of those. Don't go and get like a big 7-inch Makita and think you're going to be buffing tiny little braces. I do have one of those for doing larger panels, but little motorcycle parts, man, you're just going to throw it across the shop using one of those things. So
If it decides it wants to go, let it.
yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Keep your fingers and
Yes.
let the part go.
Yeah. But yeah.
Can you talk about clear coating versus not clear coating?
Okay, so I think what you're referring to is base coat, clear coat versus single stage paint. Is that a better way to put it? Okay, so this is base coat, clear coat, which means I put base coat on, which is just color. It's not UV protected. It has a little bit of a binder in it, but it's not like a catalyzed paint. So, if I really scratched hard on these two sections, I could get it off. It's not on there super great, okay? So then you go back and you put clear coat on it. So the other idea is, or what he was saying was single stage paint, meaning instead of this would be 2-stage paint, right? Base coat, then I put a clear coat. That's 2 stages. Single stage would be the paint is one coat or one product. It just gets spit out as a shiny pigmented paint.
Rattle can.
Well, these clear coats, you could turn this clear coat into a single stage by adding some base coat to it. I've seen people do that. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. I haven't tested that, but it's more like, I think it's starting to become more of like an opinion-based thing. A lot of people with these old motorcycles say it has to be single stage because in 1928 it was single stage paint. Well, they also applied it very poorly in 1928. I mean, just the fact that we're putting it on with really nice spray guns and getting it completely dust-free. You think Milwaukee did that in 1928? Not even a breath of that close to it, right? So just the idea that we're like doing this is like going above and beyond from what original would be. But let's talk about some of the differences between the two. So if I am doing 2 different colors with single stage, you get a pretty thick section, right? And if I want to buff and polish that, there's a chance that I could buff and polish sections of the color that was on top of the one below it off, because it's just, it would be the red paint in this case sitting on top of the olive paint, right? So if I'm trying to buff it and make it as shiny as this front part of the fender, I could take some of that red off, right? It might not be as easy as coating the whole thing and then you just buff over all of it. So that's kind of my take. The other take is that when you're doing buffing, polishing, and wet sanding of single stages, is they're really messy because you're sanding off pigment. All of your buffing pads have the paint in the buffing pads, right? So if I use my Indian, for instance, is painted with single stage paint. I buffed the whole thing with buffing pads. They were like, I mean, they looked like a fire engine when I was done. They were just super red. If I'm going to use those buffing pads on, let's say, a white paint job later, there's a potential that I could transfer some of that.
You're screwed.
Right. I mean, there's a potential that that could affect something later, right? So that's yeah.
But I've heard if you cut through your clear coat, you cannot buff it off. Versus in the single stage, you have a scratch or something, you can buff that off.
So what you're saying is if I go through the clear coat into the base, I'm not going to buff that off. That's true. That's true, because now I'm into the base that is not catalyzed and is not hardened like the clear coat. So yes, that's a very good point. That would be true. Yes.
So you know you're at the gas station and you're putting gas in your nice shiny black BMW, and you drip some gas on there and you think, oh my God, I got gas in my tank, or brake fluid, or what are some of the things that the paint can't do well with, and things that you don't have to worry that much about?
All of that it doesn't do good with. All of the stuff you just said. Yeah, all of it. It's horrible for you. Yeah, gas all over it. I mean, gas is half alcohol these days, right? So, yeah, it'll start to take the paint off. Brake fluid's the worst.
Yeah.
Brake fluid is absolutely the worst.
It's
I mean,
a wonderful stripper.
yeah, exactly. Backing plates that are painted don't have paint on them very long. I'll just say that. That's why it's all powder coated. There used to be paints that could handle it, but they got outlawed because they were extraordinarily dangerous. But
Blood-based mammals.
so you know,
Be careful and get
be
it off
careful,
fast.
yeah, and get it off as fast as you can. Yeah, yeah,
And I noticed that everything that you use there will kill you, right?
yes.
Seriously,
And
seriously.
California, it cause cancer.
Let's see, is there anything, maybe that rag, that rag's probably the safest thing on the table. Yeah, it's all bad for you. It's all bad for you. Probably, maybe this, maybe the
That'll kill you.
isopropyl
No,
alcohol.
no.
Yeah, it'll kill you. but-
That's wood alcohol, it'll make you go blind.
Yeah. It'll kill your liver.
All right, so yeah, it's all bad for you. Yeah, so I didn't talk about safety with this stuff, but always respirators, rubber gloves, latex, all of it. Yeah, all of it. They'll have warning labels on them. Follow the warning labels. This isn't about the warning. This isn't about a safety talk necessarily, but yeah, it's all bad for you. For
The
sure.
main thing I've learned from all this is bring my paint to you.
Not necessarily to me, maybe to somebody, but anyway, the point is, if there's a takeaway, yes, it is labor intensive and it's expensive. It can be rewarding to learn how to do this stuff. It's super cool to be like, I did this, I painted my own motorcycle. So, do it, you should do it, is what I think. You should learn how to do it, it would be fun.
All right.